Have you ever wondered how one small act of kindness can ripple through a lifetime? In the bustling streets of a wealthy neighborhood, a struggling teenager, Elijah Turner, faced a choice that would change everything. A pregnant woman was on the verge of collapse, her face pale, her steps unsteady. Dozens of people passed by, their eyes flicking toward her before hurrying on. But not Elijah. Despite his own hardships, an eviction notice at home, and a mother working endless shifts, he ran to her side. What drove him to act when others turned away? What happened next was more than just saving a life. It was the start of a journey that would challenge everything Elijah believed about himself. Follow this gripping story of courage, resilience, and the unexpected opportunities born from one fateful moment. The path ahead is anything but predictable. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. Is the weather chilly where you are? If so, be sure to bundle up and stay warm. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another inspiring story like this. Let's get started. Elijah Turner was no stranger to hardship. At just 16, he had endured more than most adults, growing up in the gritty streets of Riverside Heights, a neighborhood where broken streetlights cast shadows over graffiti-covered walls and cracked sidewalks. The hum of distant sirens was a constant backdrop to his life, a reminder of the challenges that surrounded him. Yet, despite the odds, Elijah had managed to hold on to something precious, his unwavering hope. The day began as it often did, with the shrill, jarring sound of his second-hand alarm clock rattling him from sleep. Elijah groaned, rolling over on the worn-out mattress that served as his bed. The springs creaked beneath him, threatening to give way at any moment. His room, though modest, was a testament to his determination. Carefully folded books sat on a makeshift shelf, and a small calendar taped to the wall bore motivational quotes he'd written himself. As he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, his gaze fell on the kitchen table visible through the open doorway. There it was, taunting him, a stark white eviction notice stamped with angry red letters. The words blurred in his vision as a lump formed in his throat. Final notice, it read, and it wasn't the first time. Elijah's mother, Gloria, had been doing everything she could to make ends meet, but the diner job she clung to barely kept food on their table, let alone paid the mounting bills. Elijah forced himself to sit up, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. He stretched, the stiffness in his back reminding him that sleeping on a decades-old mattress wasn't exactly comfortable. He glanced at the digital clock. 6:15 Uhr morgens. Another early start to what promised to be an exhausting day. Gloria had already left for her morning shift, leaving behind a small note on the counter next to a plate of toast. Elijah walked over, picking up the note with a soft smile. "Have a good day, Eli. Love you, Mom." The handwriting was shaky, evidence of the long hours and double shifts she had been pulling. Grateful for her love, Elijah quickly scarfed down the cold toast and packed his school books into his worn backpack. The bag, frayed at the edges, had been patched several times with duct tape, a fix he'd learned from a YouTube tutorial. He slung it over his shoulder, stepping outside into the chilly morning air. The sun had barely risen when Elijah Turner set out on his daily walk to school. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee from nearby cafes that lined the wealthier neighborhoods. Elijah adjusted the straps of his patched-up backpack, his thoughts wandering to the math test he had later that day. He was determined to do well, knowing that every small victory brought him closer to his dream of a better life for him and his mother. Crossing the bridge that separated Riverside Heights from the more affluent part of town, Elijah's pace slowed. The sudden transition was always striking. On one side, there were rundown apartments and cracked sidewalks. On the other, clean streets lined with manicured hedges and towering office buildings that gleamed in the sunlight. He took the usual route past the towering headquarters of Pierce Innovations, a building that seemed to scrape the sky. Elijah always felt like an intruder walking through this area, a fleeting shadow in a world of polished surfaces and expensive cars. He kept his head down, trying not to draw attention, but he couldn't help but glance at the bustling office workers through the glass doors. They moved with purpose, carrying briefcases and speaking into sleek earpieces. It was a world that felt distant, yet tantalizingly close. As he rounded a corner, Elijah's gaze was drawn to a figure up ahead. A woman, visibly pregnant, stood on the sidewalk near the entrance to a boutique store. She seemed unsteady, her hands clutching her rounded belly. Her face was pale, beads of sweat glistening on her forehead despite the cool morning air. She shifted her weight, her knees buckling slightly, and Elijah's heart skipped a beat. He paused mid-step, unsure of what to do. Around him, other pedestrians walked by, without so much as a glance in her direction. A man in a tailored suit passed close enough to touch her, but kept his eyes fixed on his phone. A jogger swerved around her without breaking stride. Elijah's mother had always told him to be careful in this part of town, to keep his head down and avoid trouble. But watching the woman struggle, he felt a pull stronger than his fear. For a moment, he hesitated. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Stay out of trouble, Elijah. Keep your head low and focus on your future." But another voice, quieter yet more insistent, told him he couldn't just walk away. Without giving himself time to overthink, Elijah quickened his pace, closing the distance between them. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he called out, his voice steady but concerned. The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with panic. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Suddenly, her legs gave way, and she began to collapse. Elijah lunged forward, catching her just in time. He lowered her gently to the ground, kneeling beside her on the cold pavement. "It's okay," he said softly, trying to steady his own racing heart. "I've got you. Just breathe." The woman nodded weakly, gripping his arm as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Her breaths came in short, shallow gasps, and Elijah could see the strain etched on her face. "Does it hurt? Do you think it's the baby?" he asked, his voice tinged with urgency. She nodded again, her grip tightening. I think it's too soon," she managed to whisper, her words trembling with fear. Elijah scanned the area, searching for help. The people walking past had started to slow, their curiosity piqued. A small crowd began to gather, whispering among themselves, but doing nothing to assist. Elijah felt the weight of their stares, but he didn't let it distract him. "Someone call an ambulance," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. A man in the crowd finally pulled out his phone, murmuring something to the operator. Elijah turned his attention back to the woman. "Just keep breathing," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Help is on the way." Elijah Turner remained kneeling on the hard pavement, his hands steady as he supported Anna Pierce. Her breathing was shallow but consistent now, a faint improvement from the alarming gasps earlier. Her grip on his arm had loosened slightly, a sign that she was starting to regain some composure. The crowd, still murmuring and snapping pictures with their phones, kept its distance, unsure whether to intervene or leave the situation to Elijah and the approaching paramedics. The faint wail of sirens grew louder, the sound cutting through the tension in the air. Elijah exhaled a sigh of relief. Help was finally arriving. Despite his aching knees and the stiffness in his arms, he didn't let go. His focus remained solely on Anna. "It's okay, ma'am," Elijah said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. "They'll take care of you now." Anna nodded weakly, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice strained but sincere. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Elijah managed a small smile, though he still felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I'm just glad I was here," he replied. As the ambulance pulled up, two paramedics jumped out, moving with practiced urgency. A tall man with graying hair and a firm expression approached Elijah and Anna. "What's her condition?" the paramedic asked, kneeling beside Elijah. "She felt faint and started to fall," Elijah explained quickly. "She said it might be the baby. It's too early." The paramedic nodded, taking over from Elijah and examining Anna carefully. Another paramedic rolled a stretcher toward them, positioning it beside her. "You did a good job keeping her stable, kid," the older paramedic said, sparing Elijah a brief glance before turning his full attention back to Anna. Elijah stepped back, finally letting go of Anna's arm. His legs protested as he stood, a sharp ache radiating from his knees. Despite the discomfort, he didn't move far, his eyes remaining on Anna as the paramedics carefully transferred her onto the stretcher. "Is she going to be okay?" Elijah asked hesitantly. "She's stable for now," the paramedic assured him, his tone professional. "We'll get her to the hospital and run some tests. It's good you acted fast. It might have saved her and the baby." Elijah swallowed hard, the gravity of the statement sinking in. He glanced down at his hands, realizing they were trembling slightly. The weight of what could have happened if he hadn't stepped in was overwhelming. Just as the paramedics began loading Anna into the ambulance, a voice called out from behind the crowd. "Anna!" Elijah turned to see a man in a sharp navy blue suit pushing through the gathering onlookers. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his tie was askew, but his commanding presence was unmistakable. His eyes, filled with worry, locked onto Anna as he hurried toward the ambulance. "Is she okay?" the man demanded, addressing both the paramedics and Elijah. "She's stable, Mr. Pierce," one of the paramedics replied. "We're taking her to the hospital now." Relief flickered across the man's face, but it didn't erase the tension in his features. He stepped closer to Anna, crouching beside the stretcher and taking her hand in his. "Anna, I'm here," he said softly, his voice steady despite the obvious strain. Anna looked up at him, her eyes glassy with tears. "I'm okay, Martin," she murmured. "He helped me?" Martin Pierce turned his gaze to Elijah, his expression shifting from worry to gratitude. He stood, towering over Elijah but radiating warmth rather than intimidation. "You were the one who helped her?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. Elijah nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious under the man's piercing gaze. "She looked like she was about to fall. I just did what I could." Martin extended a hand toward Elijah, his grip firm but kind. "I don't know how to thank you," he said earnestly. "You may have saved my wife and our child. That's not something I can ever repay." Elijah shook his head, stepping back slightly. "You don't need to thank me, sir. I just did what anyone should have done." Martin studied Elijah for a moment, as if trying to understand the boy standing before him. Elijah's clothes were worn, his backpack frayed, and there was dirt smudged on his knees from where he'd knelt to help Anna. But there was something in Elijah's demeanor, humility mixed with quiet strength, that struck Martin deeply. The paramedics finished securing Anna inside the ambulance, and one of them motioned for Martin. "We're ready to go, Mr. Pierce. You can ride with her if you'd like." Martin nodded, but didn't move right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, embossed business card. He held it out to Elijah, his expression earnest. "Please," Martin said, "take this. If there's ever anything you need, anything at all, don't hesitate to call me." Elijah hesitated, staring at the card. It felt heavy in his hand, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. The name Martin Pierce, CEO, was printed in bold letters, along with a phone number and the logo for Pierce Innovations. Elijah recognized the name instantly. Martin Pierce was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the city, a man whose business empire was known for innovation and philanthropy. "Thank you," Elijah said quietly, slipping the card into the pocket of his jeans. He didn't know what else to say. Martin placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, a gesture of genuine gratitude. "You're a good kid," he said. "Not everyone would have stepped up the way you did. I won't forget this." With that, Martin climbed into the ambulance, taking a seat beside Anna. The doors closed with a soft thud, and the vehicle pulled away, its sirens fading into the distance. The crowd began to disperse, the brief moment of drama dissolving into the usual hum of city life. Elijah stood alone on the sidewalk, his mind racing. He pulled the card from his pocket, turning it over in his hand. It felt surreal. Moments ago, he had been just another kid walking to school, and now he was carrying a token of gratitude from one of the most powerful men in the city. As he slipped the card back into his pocket, Elijah felt a strange mix of pride and uncertainty. He didn't help Anna for recognition or reward. He had simply done what he thought was right. But now, with the weight of Martin Pierce's gratitude resting on his shoulders, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than he could imagine. With a deep breath, Elijah adjusted his backpack and continued walking to school, the events of the morning replaying in his mind. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. His life was about to change forever. Elijah sat on the edge of his bed, the small business card from Martin Pierce resting in his hand. The words on it seemed to glow in the dim light of the single bulb that hung from his bedroom ceiling. Martin Pierce, CEO, Pierce Innovations. The sleek design and embossed text felt foreign in his world of patched-up belongings and overdue notices. It had been 2 days since the incident, and Elijah hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. He remembered Anna's pale face, the crowd that had simply walked by, and Martin's gratitude. The card burned in his pocket like an unanswered question. Could he really call? What would he even say? Across the room, his mother's faint hum echoed from the tiny kitchen as she prepared their dinner. Beans and rice, the usual. Gloria had been working double shifts at the diner for weeks now, her hands more calloused and her smile more tired than Elijah had ever seen. And despite her efforts, the eviction notice still loomed over them, a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Elijah sighed, gripping the card tightly. He wasn't used to asking for help. His mom had raised him to be self-reliant, to fight for what he needed, but this felt different. He had done something good, something meaningful, and maybe for once it was okay to reach out. The next morning, before leaving for school, Elijah stared at the old landline phone sitting on the counter. Its plastic casing was cracked, and it often crackled with static, but it still worked. With a deep breath, he dialed the number on the card. The line rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. Pierce Innovations, this is Evelyn speaking. How may I direct your call? Elijah hesitated, his mouth suddenly dry. My name is Elijah Turner, he began nervously. I helped Mr. Pierce's wife the other day, and he gave me his card. I was wondering if I could talk to him? There was a pause, and Elijah's heart sank. What if she thought he was lying? Or worse, what if Martin Pierce didn't remember him at all? One moment, please, Evelyn replied, her tone polite but unreadable. The line clicked, and soft classical music played in the background as Elijah waited. Hello? A familiar voice said, breaking the silence. Elijah straightened instinctively. Mr. Pierce? This is Elijah Turner. I don't know if you remember me. Elijah, Martin interrupted warmly. Of course, I remember you. How are you, son? Is everything all right? Yes, sir, Elijah replied quickly, adjusting the strap of his backpack as he balanced the phone on his shoulder. I just wanted to check in and see how Mrs. Pierce and the baby are doing. There was a pause, followed by a note of genuine gratitude in Martin's tone. They're both doing wonderfully, Elijah. Anna's recovering well, and the baby's growing strong. I can't thank you enough for what you did. Elijah smiled faintly, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. I'm really glad to hear that, sir. I've been thinking about them. And how are you doing, Elijah? Martin asked, his voice softening. Yes, not doing so well. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but you said I could call if I needed anything. And, well, I was hoping you might be able to help my mom. She's been looking for steady work, and things have been really hard for us lately. There was a moment of silence on the other end, and Elijah wondered if he'd said too much. But when Martin spoke again, his tone was thoughtful. Your mom, what does she do? She's worked in diners and clean houses, Elijah explained. She's not afraid of hard work, sir. She just needs a chance. Martin's response was immediate. I'd like to help. Elijah Turner could barely contain his anticipation as he and his mother, Gloria, stepped into the lobby of Pierce Innovations for a second time. This visit felt different from the first. Though the towering glass walls and bustling professionals still made Elijah feel out of place, there was a quiet optimism in the air. For once, the weight of uncertainty that had hung over their family for months seemed to be lifting, if only slightly. Gloria adjusted her modest outfit for the 100th time, smoothing the wrinkles that weren't there. I hope this goes well, she murmured, her voice tinged with nerves. It will, Mom, Elijah said confidently. Mr. Pierce wouldn't have asked us to come if he didn't mean to help. As they approached the reception desk, the same polished assistant from the day before greeted them. Evelyn, with her composed demeanor and warm smile, made them feel more welcome than Elijah had expected. "Mr. Pierce is ready to see you," she said, standing to guide them to his office. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, the hum of machinery the only sound as they ascended. When the elevator doors opened, the familiar sight of Martin Pierce's sunlit office came into view. The CEO himself stood near the window, his hands in his pockets, looking out at the city skyline. He turned as they entered, a broad smile breaking across his face. "Elijah, Mrs. Turner, thank you for coming." He stepped forward, extending a hand to Gloria. She shook it firmly, though Elijah noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. "Thank you for having us," Gloria replied. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the mix of hope and apprehension she felt. "Please, have a seat," Martin said, gesturing to the plush chairs in front of his desk. As they settled in, he took his seat across from them, folding his hands on the polished surface of his desk. "I've been thinking about how I can help," Martin began, his tone genuine. "Elijah told me about your situation, and I want you to know that I admire the strength it takes to keep going in the face of such challenges." Gloria glanced at Elijah, her eyes softening, before turning back to Martin. "We've had our struggles, but I've always believed in working hard and doing what's right. I just want a chance to provide for my son." Martin nodded, leaning forward slightly. "And that's exactly what I'd like to offer you, a chance. We have a position in our building services team. It's maintenance work, cleaning, upkeep, and making sure everything runs smoothly. It's not easy, but it's steady, honest work. The job comes with benefits, including health care, which I know can make a big difference." For a moment, Gloria was silent. Elijah could see the emotions playing across her face: disbelief, gratitude, and a touch of hesitation. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap before speaking. "I don't want charity, Mr. Pierce," she said quietly. "I want to earn what I'm given. I need to know that I'm being hired because I'm capable, not because you feel sorry for us." Martin's expression softened, and he nodded in understanding. "Mrs. Turner, I wouldn't be offering this if I didn't believe you were capable. From what Elijah has told me, and from what I've seen in him, I know that hard work and determination run in your family. This isn't charity. It's an opportunity for both of us." Tears welled in Gloria's eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I won't let you down." "I have no doubt about that," Martin said warmly. He reached into a folder on his desk and pulled out a small stack of papers. "Evelyn will help you finalize the paperwork today. You can start next week if that works for you." Gloria nodded, unable to speak. Elijah watched her, his heart swelling with pride. For the first time in what felt like forever, his mother's shoulders seemed less burdened, her eyes brighter. As they left Martin's office, Evelyn guided Gloria to another room to complete the onboarding process. Elijah waited in the lobby, tapping his foot nervously against the marble floor. His mind buzzed with thoughts of what this new job could mean for their future. No more eviction notices, no more skipped meals, no more seeing his mom come home exhausted from endless shifts at the diner. About 30 minutes later, Gloria emerged, holding a folder of documents. Her smile was small but genuine, a glimpse of the joy she had once worn so easily. She walked toward Elijah, her steps lighter than he'd seen in weeks. "Well?" Elijah asked, standing up quickly. "It's official," Gloria said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I start next Monday." Elijah grinned, resisting the urge to hug her in the middle of the sleek, professional lobby. "That's amazing, Mom. I'm so proud of you." As they exited the building and stepped onto the bustling sidewalk, Gloria paused, taking a deep breath. "Elijah," she said softly, turning to look at him, "I don't know what I would have done without you. If you hadn't stepped in to help that woman." She trailed off, shaking her head. "You're the reason we're here. You've given me a chance to finally get things right." Elijah's grin faltered for a moment, replaced by a serious expression. "You've always done your best for me, Mom. It's my turn to help. We're a team, right?" Gloria nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Always." The walk home that evening felt different. The air was still crisp, and the familiar streets of Riverside Heights hadn't magically changed, but something was different in Elijah's heart. For the first time in a long time, there was hope, real hope. When they reached their apartment, Gloria carefully placed the folder on the kitchen table, smoothing her hand over it as though it were a treasure. Elijah sat down across from her, the eviction notice still tucked beneath a stack of unopened mail. Gloria glanced at it, then back at Elijah. "I'm going to call the landlord tomorrow," she said firmly. "Tell him we'll have the rent on time this month. Maybe even early." Elijah nodded, a smile creeping back onto his face. "We're turning things around, Mom." Gloria reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We are," she said, her voice filled with determination. "One step at a time." That night, as Elijah lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, he allowed himself to dream. Not just about the relief this job would bring, but about what could come next for both of them. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, he felt like they were walking it together, with the promise of something better just over the horizon. Elijah Turner didn't think much about the moment he had saved Anna Pierce after it happened. For him, stepping in was simply the right thing to do. He had never expected recognition or thanks, let alone what would follow. A few days after Gloria's meeting with Martin Pierce, Elijah's life took an unexpected turn. It started with a murmur at school. As Elijah walked down the crowded hallways, he noticed students glancing at him, their conversations halting as he passed. He brushed it off at first, assuming he had imagined it, but as the day wore on, it became impossible to ignore. "Hey, that's him, right?" A voice whispered from behind him during math class. "Elijah, yeah." "The one who saved that woman," another replied. Elijah shifted uncomfortably in his seat, pretending not to hear. He focused on his notebook, forcing himself to concentrate on the equations in front of him. But when the lunch bell rang, the murmurs followed him to the cafeteria. As Elijah slid his tray onto an empty table and sat down, a group of students approached him. Among them were Jordan, a popular basketball player, and Maya, a girl from his English class known for her outgoing personality. "Elijah, right?" Jordan asked, leaning casually against the table. "Yeah," Elijah replied cautiously, unsure of where this was going. "I saw the video," Jordan said, his tone filled with admiration. "Man, that was crazy. You just ran in there like a superhero or something." Elijah blinked. "Video?" he asked, confused. Maya pulled out her phone, tapping the screen before holding it up for Elijah to see. There, on a brightly lit screen, was footage of him kneeling beside Anna Pierce, helping her stay upright until the ambulance arrived. The video was shaky, clearly taken by someone in the crowd, but it captured every crucial moment. The look of concern on Elijah's face, the suspicion of a security guard, and Martin Pierce stepping in to defend him. "It's all over social media," Maya explained, sitting across from him. "You're trending. People are calling you a hero." Elijah stared at the screen, his stomach flipping. He hadn't realized anyone had recorded that day, let alone shared it online. Comments scrolled beneath the video, a mix of admiration and debate. Words like selfless, brave, and inspiring stood out, but so did others. "What was a kid like him doing there? And I bet he was looking for trouble." "I'm not a hero," Elijah muttered, pushing the phone back toward Maya. "I just helped someone who needed it." "Come on, don't be so modest," Jordan said with a grin. "You saved her life, and people are noticing. You should be proud." Elijah didn't respond. Instead, he focused on his sandwich, hoping the conversation would end. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the thought of so many strangers watching that moment made him feel exposed. By the time school let out, the news had spread further. Teachers smiled at Elijah in the hallways, and a few even stopped to offer words of praise. Miss Alvarez, his English teacher, called him to her desk after class. "Elijah, I heard about what you did," she said, her tone warm. "You should be proud of yourself. It's not every day someone shows that kind of courage." "Thank you, Miss Alvarez," Elijah replied, his cheeks burning. "But I was just in the right place at the right time." "Don't sell yourself short," she said, her eyes kind. "It takes a special kind of person to act when others don't." Elijah nodded politely and hurried out of the classroom. He appreciated the support, but the attention was overwhelming. He wasn't sure how to handle it. At home that evening, Gloria noticed Elijah's unease as they sat at the kitchen table. She placed a bowl of steaming soup in front of him and sat down with her own. "What's on your mind, Elijah?" she asked, her voice gentle. He hesitated, stirring his soup with a spoon. There's a video of me helping Mrs. Pierce, he admitted. It's everywhere. People are talking about it at school. Gloria's brow furrowed with concern. What kind of things are they saying? Some good, some bad, Elijah said, shrugging. They're calling me a hero, but I don't know. I didn't do it for attention. Gloria reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on his. I know you didn't. You did it because it was the right thing to do. And that's what makes you special, Elijah. Let people say what they want. You know the truth. Elijah nodded, her words bringing him some comfort. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the spotlight wasn't where he belonged. The next morning, Elijah found himself at the center of even more attention. A local news outlet had picked up the story, and a reporter showed up outside the school. As Elijah approached the entrance, she called out to him. Elijah Turner? She asked, microphone in hand. Do you have a moment to talk about your heroic act? Elijah froze, unsure of what to do. A small crowd of students had gathered, their phones out and recording. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Maya, who gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Elijah stepped forward. I don't really think I'm a hero, he said, his voice steady but quiet. I just saw someone who needed help, and I did what anyone should have done. That's all. The reporter smiled, clearly trying to draw more out of him. But not everyone would have acted so quickly, especially at your age. What inspired you to step in? Elijah hesitated, then answered honestly. My mom taught me to always do the right thing, even when it's hard. That's all I was trying to do. The reporter nodded, thanking him for his time before turning back to the camera. Elijah slipped inside the school, relieved to be out of the spotlight. Throughout the day, the attention continued, but Elijah tried to focus on his classes and ignore the whispers. By lunchtime, he had managed to find a quiet corner of the schoolyard where he could sit alone. But before long, Maya found him. You okay? She asked, sitting beside him. Yeah, Elijah said, though he didn't sound convincing. It's just a lot. I get that, Maya said, offering him a small smile. But you handled it well. Not everyone gets a chance to be recognized for something good. Elijah nodded, taking her words to heart. He didn't like the attention, but maybe he could use it to set an example, to show that doing the right thing didn't require recognition or reward. By the end of the week, the buzz had begun to fade, replaced by the next trending topic. Elijah was relieved, but also grateful for the experience. It reminded him of the importance of humility and staying true to himself, even when others tried to label him as something more. He didn't need to be a hero. He just needed to keep doing what he knew was right. The excitement surrounding Elijah Turner's act of kindness had started to settle, but the effects of that fateful day lingered in unexpected ways. His story continued to ripple through the community, catching the attention of people he'd never imagined. Among them was Martin Pierce, whose gratitude for Elijah's role in saving his wife and unborn child only deepened with time. It had been a few weeks since Gloria started her new job at Pierce Innovations, and Elijah was adjusting to the quieter buzz around his life. The attention at school had dwindled, but the whispers of admiration occasionally surfaced. Elijah, however, kept his focus on his studies and his commitment to helping his mom. One afternoon, as Elijah walked home from school, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he was surprised to see an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, he answered. Elijah? The voice on the other end said, calm and professional. Yes, this is Elijah, he replied cautiously. This is Martin Pierce. I was hoping we could meet again. Are you free this weekend? Elijah's heart skipped a beat. Martin had been kind and generous to his family, and he couldn't help but wonder what the purpose of this meeting could be. Yes, sir. I can meet, he stammered. Great, Martin said. I'll send a car to pick you up on Saturday morning. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. That Saturday, Elijah found himself once again standing in the sleek, modern lobby of Pierce Innovations. This time, he wasn't accompanied by his mother. Instead, he was alone, his nerves bouncing between excitement and anxiety. Evelyn greeted him with a warm smile and escorted him to Martin's office. When Elijah stepped inside, Martin was seated behind his desk, reviewing a stack of papers. He looked up and smiled warmly as Elijah entered. Elijah, thanks for coming, Martin said, standing and motioning for him to sit in one of the chairs across the desk. Thank you for inviting me, Elijah replied, settling into the chair. Martin leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. Elijah, I've been thinking a lot about you lately, your actions, your character, and the challenges you and your mother have faced. I see something in you, Elijah. You're smart, determined, and selfless. Those qualities are rare, especially at your age. Elijah shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond to the praise. I just try to do what's right, he said modestly. And that's exactly why I believe in you, Martin said with a nod. Elijah, I know your family has been through tough times, but I want to help make things a little easier. More than that, I want to invest in your future. Elijah blinked, his heart pounding. What do you mean? Martin reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a neatly bound folder. Sliding it across the desk, he explained, I'd like to offer you a scholarship, one that will cover your education through high school and help you get into college. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Elijah stared at the folder, unsure if he had heard correctly. A scholarship, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Martin confirmed. I've spoken with several schools, including some of the best preparatory academies in the city. They're willing to accept you with full financial support. This would be your chance to focus on your studies without worrying about the costs. And when the time comes, we'll make sure you have what you need to get into college. Elijah's hands trembled as he picked up the folder, his mind racing. This was more than he'd ever dreamed of, a chance to escape the cycle of struggle and to pursue a future he hadn't dared to imagine. But as the excitement surged, so did doubt. I don't know if I can do this, Elijah admitted, his voice shaking. These schools, the kids there, I wouldn't fit in. Martin's expression softened, and he leaned back in his chair. Elijah, you've already proven that you can rise to any challenge. The fact that you're sitting here after everything you've been through speaks volumes about your strength and potential. This isn't about fitting in, it's about becoming the person you're meant to be. Elijah swallowed hard, the weight of Martin's words pressing against the doubts in his mind. I just want to make things better for my mom, he said quietly. She's worked so hard for so long, and I don't want to let her down. You won't, Martin assured him. In fact, by pursuing your education and following your dreams, you'll be doing exactly what your mother wants for you. This isn't just about what you can achieve for yourself, Elijah. It's about what you can build for your family and your community. Elijah nodded slowly, his resolve beginning to take shape. What if I fail? He asked, his voice barely audible. Martin smiled, his tone firm but kind. Then you try again. Failure isn't the end, Elijah. It's part of the journey. The only failure would be not trying at all. By the time Elijah left Martin's office, the folder clutched tightly in his hands. His heart felt lighter than it had in years. The ride home was a blur as he replayed the conversation in his mind. When he stepped into their apartment, Gloria was setting the table for dinner. You're home early, she said with a smile. But when she noticed the expression on his face, she paused. Elijah, what's going on? Elijah placed the folder on the table, his hands trembling slightly. Mom, he began, his voice shaking with emotion. Mr. Pierce offered me a scholarship. He said it'll cover everything, school, books, even college. Gloria's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. A scholarship? She repeated, tears welling in her eyes. Elijah, that's incredible. I didn't think something like this could happen, Elijah admitted. But he believes in me. He thinks I can do this. Gloria stepped forward, pulling him into a tight hug. Of course you can, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You've always been capable, Elijah. You just needed someone to see it, and now they have. That night, as Elijah lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities. The doubts still lingered, whispering that he didn't belong in the world Martin was opening up for him. But another voice, stronger, steadier, reminded him of everything he had already overcome. If he could face those challenges, he could face this too. For the first time, Elijah allowed himself to dream about the future. He pictured classrooms filled with opportunities, college campuses buzzing with possibility, and a life where he could give his mother the peace she deserved. And as he drifted to sleep, a single thought anchored him. I can do this. Elijah Turner stood at the gates of Crestview Academy, his heart pounding in his chest. The stately iron gates and sprawling campus beyond them were worlds away from the modest public school he had attended all his life. Crestview, with its meticulously manicured lawns and towering red brick buildings, radiated prestige and opportunity. Elijah gripped the straps of his new backpack, one of the items Mr. Pierce had helped him purchase, and took a deep breath. This was his first day at the elite prep school, and he was equal parts excited and terrified. Gloria had done her best to reassure him that morning, her pride evident as she adjusted the collar of his blazer. "You belong here, Elijah," she had said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Her words replayed in his mind as he walked through the gates, joining the throng of students bustling toward the main building. Most of them moved with ease, chatting in small groups or scrolling through their phones. Elijah, in contrast, felt like an outsider. He adjusted his tie nervously, his eyes scanning for familiar faces, though he knew there wouldn't be any. The first challenge came as soon as he entered the school building, navigating its maze-like hallways. Crestview was massive compared to his old school, with wings dedicated to various subjects and state-of-the-art facilities that seemed more fitting for a college campus than a high school. After a few wrong turns and polite redirections from passing students, Elijah finally found his homeroom. As he stepped inside, the noise of the room quieted momentarily, and several students turned to look at him. Elijah avoided their gazes, quickly finding an empty seat near the back. He busied himself with organizing his supplies, hoping to blend into the background. The teacher, Mr. Callahan, entered shortly after and called the class to attention. He introduced Elijah to the group, his voice warm and encouraging. "Class, we have a new student joining us today, Elijah Turner. Let's make him feel welcome." A smattering of polite smiles and nods greeted Elijah, but one student in particular caught his eye. A tall boy with dark hair and an easygoing demeanor leaned over from the row ahead. "Hey, I'm Logan," he whispered. "Welcome to Crestview." Elijah offered a small smile. "Thanks." The morning passed in a blur of introductions and syllabus overviews. Each class brought its own challenges. Teachers who expected more engagement, classmates who already seemed to know each other, and material that felt a step ahead of what Elijah was used to. But despite his initial nerves, he found himself growing more comfortable as the day progressed. At lunch, Elijah hesitated in the cafeteria, unsure of where to sit. The room was filled with clusters of students, each group seeming firmly established. He considered finding a quiet corner when a familiar voice called out, "Elijah, over here!" It was Logan, waving him over to a table near the windows. Relieved, Elijah made his way over and slid into an empty seat. "This is Jenna," Logan said, gesturing to a girl with curly brown hair and a bright smile. "She's in our science class." "Hi, Elijah," Jenna said warmly. "How's your first day going?" "Overwhelming," Elijah admitted with a small chuckle. Jenna laughed. "That sounds about right. But don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. Logan and I can show you around if you want." "Yeah," Logan agreed. "Stick with us. Crestview can be a lot, but it's not so bad once you find your people." Elijah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find his place here. The afternoon brought a surprise in the form of gym class. Elijah had never been particularly athletic, but when the coach divided the students into teams for basketball, he found himself paired with Logan. The game started off rocky. Elijah struggled to keep up with the quick pace and sharp passes, but Logan was patient, offering tips and encouragement throughout. "Don't worry about making the shot," Logan said during a timeout. "Just focus on getting the ball to me or Jenna. We'll take it from there." By the end of the game, Elijah had managed a few decent plays, even earning a high five from Jenna after a successful assist. The camaraderie on the court was unexpected, but welcome. As the final bell rang, Elijah gathered his things and prepared to head home. He was exhausted but felt a sense of accomplishment. The day hadn't been perfect. There had been moments of doubt and awkwardness, but it was a start. As he walked toward the school gates, Logan caught up to him. "Hey, Elijah, a bunch of us are heading to the library to work on a project. Want to come?" Elijah hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready to dive into group work just yet, but the invitation felt genuine. "Maybe next time," Elijah said, offering a grateful smile. Cool, Logan replied, clapping him on the shoulder. See you tomorrow. When Elijah arrived home, Gloria was waiting at the table, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. Her eyes lit up as he walked in. How was it? She asked eagerly. Elijah set his bag down and sank into a chair. It was different, he admitted. Big, intense, but I think it's going to be okay. Gloria reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm so proud of you, Elijah. You're going to do amazing things. I can feel it. Her confidence was contagious, and for the first time, Elijah started to believe it himself. That night, as he lay in bed, Elijah replayed the events of the day in his mind. He thought about Logan and Jenna, the challenges of his classes, and the possibilities that Crestview represented. The road ahead was still daunting, but for the first time, it felt manageable. Elijah Turner was no longer just a boy from Riverside Heights. He was a student at Crestview Academy, standing on the threshold of a new world filled with opportunities. And as he drifted to sleep, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Elijah Turner sat at his desk, staring at the open textbook in front of him. His first few weeks at Crestview Academy had been a whirlwind of challenges. Every class seemed to push him beyond his comfort zone, and the academic rigor felt relentless. It wasn't that Elijah didn't enjoy learning. He loved it. But the pressure to keep up with his classmates, who all seemed so polished and prepared, was overwhelming. That night, as he tried to focus on a particularly complex algebra problem, his frustration boiled over. His pencil snapped under the strain of his grip, and he pushed the book away, burying his face in his hands. I can't do this, he muttered to himself. What was I thinking? I don't belong here. The weight of self-doubt pressed down on him, suffocating and relentless. Despite the encouraging smiles from Logan and Jenna, despite the pep talks from his teachers, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that he was an outsider, someone who had stumbled into this world by accident. The next morning, Gloria noticed Elijah's unease as they sat at the breakfast table. She set down her coffee cup and gave him a long, searching look. What's wrong, Elijah? She asked gently. Elijah hesitated, unsure if he should burden her with his worries. But Gloria was patient, waiting silently until he finally spoke. It's just hard, he admitted, his voice low. The school, the work, everything. I feel like I'm falling behind, like I don't belong there. Gloria's expression softened, and she reached across the table to take his hand. Elijah, listen to me. You do belong there. You earned this opportunity, and you have every right to be at that school. Don't let those doubts hold you back. But what if I fail? Elijah asked, his voice breaking slightly. Gloria squeezed his hand, her grip firm. Then you get back up and try again. You've faced harder things than this, Elijah. You're stronger than you think. Her words, though simple, stirred something within him. Elijah nodded, a small flicker of resolve reigniting. Later that week, during a free period, Elijah found himself sitting in the library, staring blankly at a half-finished essay. His thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. Hey, Elijah, Logan said, sliding into the seat across from him. What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost. Elijah managed a weak smile. Just trying to keep up with everything. It feels like I'm running in circles. Logan nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, Crestview can be intense. But you're doing great, man. You've got this. I don't know, Elijah admitted. Everyone else seems to have it all figured out, and I'm just trying to stay afloat. Logan leaned forward, his tone serious. Look, nobody has it all figured out. Trust me. We all struggle, even if we don't show it. The important thing is to keep going, and to ask for help when you need it. Elijah nodded, his friend's words resonating more than he expected. A few days later, Elijah's confidence was put to the test. In his literature class, the students were assigned a group project, creating a presentation on a classic novel. Elijah, Logan, and Jenna were grouped together, along with a quiet but intelligent girl named Sophie. The project required research, analysis, and creativity, skills that Elijah wasn't sure he had. As they began brainstorming, Elijah hesitated, afraid to speak up. But Logan nudged him gently. Come on, Elijah. I know you got ideas. Let's hear them. Elijah took a deep breath and shared his thoughts on the novel's themes and how they could present them visually. To his surprise, the group responded enthusiastically. "That's a great idea," Jenna said, jotting down notes. "We could build on that with some multimedia elements." Sophie nodded in agreement. "And we could tie it back to historical context to make it even more impactful." For the first time, Elijah felt like an equal contributor, his voice valued and respected. Over the next week, Elijah threw himself into the project. He spent hours in the library, researching and preparing his part of the presentation. When the day of the presentation arrived, he stood before the class, nerves jangling but determination steady. As he spoke, his words came more easily than he expected. He explained the themes of the novel, the connections to real-world events, and how the characters' struggles mirrored universal human experiences. When he finished, the class erupted into applause. "Great job, Elijah," Mr. Callahan said, smiling. "Your insights were thoughtful and well-articulated. You should be proud of yourself." Elijah's chest swelled with a pride he hadn't felt in weeks. He glanced at Logan, Jenna, and Sophie, who all grinned back at him, their support evident. The triumph in literature class wasn't the only victory Elijah experienced that week. During a science lab, Jenna struggled to assemble a model for an experiment. Frustrated, she muttered, "Why is this so complicated?" Elijah, who had already finished his own model, leaned over to help. "Here," he said, guiding her hands. "You just need to align these two parts first. It makes the rest easier." Jenna looked up at him, her expression grateful. "Thanks, Elijah. You're a lifesaver." "It's no problem," he replied, smiling. Moments like these reminded Elijah that he wasn't just keeping up. He was contributing, helping others, and proving to himself that he was capable. One evening, as Elijah reviewed his notes for an upcoming test, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Pierce. "How are things going at Crestview? Let me know if you need anything." Elijah hesitated, then replied honestly, "It's been tough, but I'm starting to find my footing. Thanks for checking in." Almost immediately, Martin responded, "Good to hear. Remember, challenges are what shape us. Keep pushing forward. You're doing great." Elijah smiled at the message, feeling a renewed sense of encouragement. By the end of the month, Elijah had begun to settle into a rhythm. He wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt and days when he felt overwhelmed, but he had learned to lean on the people around him. His mother's unwavering belief in him, Logan and Jenna's friendship, and Mr. Pierce's guidance had all become lifelines. One Friday afternoon, as Elijah packed up his books after class, Mr. Callahan approached him. "Elijah, can I have a word?" "Of course," Elijah said, curious. "I just wanted to tell you how impressed I've been with your progress," Mr. Callahan said. "You've shown remarkable growth, and your contributions in class have been outstanding." "Thank you," Elijah said, his voice humble but filled with pride. "You have a bright future ahead of you, Elijah," Mr. Callahan added. "Keep believing in yourself." As Elijah walked home that evening, his heart felt lighter. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he no longer felt like he was walking it alone, or that he was unworthy of the journey. For the first time, Elijah truly believed in himself, and that belief made all the difference. Elijah Turner sat on a worn bench at the edge of Riverside Heights Park, a place where he had spent countless afternoons as a child. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the familiar playground and the cracked basketball court. It had been months since he last visited, but something about this moment felt like a full circle, a chance to reflect on how far he had come. The park was quieter now, the usual shouts of kids playing replaced by the distant hum of traffic. Elijah's mind wandered back to the day everything changed, the moment he saw Anna Pierce stumble on the sidewalk. He couldn't have known then that helping a stranger would alter the trajectory of his life. But now, as he glanced down at the Crestview Academy patch on his blazer, he couldn't imagine how different things might have been if he had simply walked by. Elijah's journey at Crestview had been far from easy, but the challenges had shaped him in ways he never anticipated. With the support of his mother, friends like Logan and Jenna, and mentors like Martin Pierce, he had learned to trust in his own potential. His hard work was beginning to pay off. He had aced his first term, earning not just good grades, but the respect of his teachers and peers. But what mattered most to Elijah wasn't the accolades or recognition. It was the realization that his success could be a source of inspiration for others. Back in the classroom, Elijah's story had started to ripple through the Crestview community. During a school assembly, the headmaster, Dr. Whitman, invited Elijah to speak about his experience. At first, Elijah hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something he felt comfortable with. But with encouragement from Logan and Jenna, he reluctantly agreed. On the day of the assembly, Elijah stood at the podium, his hands gripping the edges nervously. The auditorium was filled with students and faculty, their faces expectant. Taking a deep breath, he began. "When I first came to Crestview, I didn't think I belonged here," Elijah admitted. "I thought everyone else was smarter, better prepared, and more deserving. I almost let those doubts stop me. But then I realized something. The only way to fail was to not try." He paused, scanning the room. "I came from a place where opportunities like this don't exist for most people. But I also came from a family that taught me to work hard and do what's right, no matter what. That's what got me here, and that's what keeps me going." By the time Elijah finished his speech, the room erupted into applause. He stepped back from the podium, his heart racing, but his spirit lighter. For the first time, he felt like his story had the power to make a difference. Back in Riverside Heights, Elijah's story began to spread beyond the walls of Crestview. His former classmates from his old school reached out, some congratulating him, others asking for advice. One afternoon, Elijah received a message from a boy named Jordan, who had once been his neighbor. Jordan had dropped out of school a year earlier, unable to see a path forward. "Elijah, I saw your speech," the message read. "It made me think maybe I could try again. Do you think it's too late for me?" Elijah's chest tightened as he read the message. He knew how it felt to believe that the odds were stacked against you, to feel like giving up was the only option. He quickly typed a response. "It's never too late, Jordan. If I can do it, so can you. Let me know how I can help." Inspired by messages like Jordan's, Elijah began to think about how he could give back to his community. He spoke with Martin Pierce, sharing his ideas about creating mentorship programs for kids in neighborhoods like Riverside Heights. "These kids need someone to believe in them," Elijah explained during a meeting at Pierce Innovations. "Someone to show them that their dreams are possible." Martin listened intently, a proud smile forming on his face. "I think that's a fantastic idea, Elijah, and I'd be honored to help you make it happen." Together, they began drafting plans for a mentorship initiative. The program would pair students from schools like Crestview with kids from underserved communities, offering tutoring, career advice, and workshops on leadership and resilience. The first workshop took place in the Riverside Heights Community Center. Elijah stood at the front of the room, looking out at a group of middle and high school students. Some sat with arms crossed, skepticism written on their faces, while others leaned forward eagerly. "I know what you're thinking," Elijah began with a grin. "Who's this guy and why should I listen to him? Trust me, I've been where you are. I felt like the world was against me, like there was no way out. But I'm here to tell you that there is." As he shared his journey, the room began to shift. By the end of the session, students were lining up to ask questions, their initial doubt replaced by curiosity and hope. That evening, as Elijah walked home from the community center, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His story was no longer just his own. It was a catalyst for change. And that realization gave him a new sense of purpose. When he arrived at the apartment, Gloria was waiting for him with a plate of cookies. She had taken the afternoon off to attend the workshop, quietly watching from the back of the room. "You were amazing," she said, pulling him into a hug. "Thanks, Mom," Elijah replied, his voice filled with gratitude. Gloria stepped back, her eyes shining. "You've come so far, Elijah. I always knew you would, but seeing it makes me so proud." As Elijah sat on the park bench, reflecting on everything that had happened, he realized how much his life had changed. One act of kindness, one moment of courage, had set off a chain reaction that he never could have anticipated. But it wasn't just about him. It was about the people who had supported him along the way. His mother, who had never given up on him, Martin Pierce, who saw his potential, and friends like Logan and Jenna, who reminded him that he wasn't alone. Elijah stood, The weight of self-doubt finally lifted. He wasn't just the boy from Riverside Heights anymore. He was a leader, a role model, and a bridge between two worlds. And as he walked home, the sun dipping below the horizon, Elijah made a silent promise. He would continue to make a difference, not just for himself, but for everyone who needed a reason to believe that their dreams were possible. His legacy was only beginning. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. Your support means the world to us. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss more inspiring stories coming your way. See you in the next one.